Okay, so today, when this direct goes public, it's going to be the embargo for Cyberpunk 2077 Phantom Liberty. Our video will be following shortly. We should already have our PC-focused video based on 2.0 content and specifically DLSS 3.5 out there. And Oliver, I'm going to go to you first on this in terms of the console side of things. When Tom basically did the preview content back in the day, it looks like, obviously it was looking like a fantastic game. Performance profile seemed to be pretty much unchanged. I mean, is there anything to add to that?
Well, what I would basically say is that I'm not super happy with Cyberpunk performance as of patch 1.63 on consoles. And I'm not super happy with Cyberpunk performance as of patch 2.0. In the performance mode in particular, the game has quite a lot of frame rate drops out in the open world on PS5 and Series S and Series X, all in their respective 60 FPS modes. And that basically has not changed for Phantom Liberty. If anything, it might actually be a little bit worse in my testing. But in terms of the graphics, I think the game still looks good in perfectly rasterized form or in local shadow RT form on the consoles. The only caveat there, obviously, well, the big caveat is that it isn't using the same ray tracing features as PC. So it's not on that level, obviously. The art assets and the density of the world is very impressive. It's certainly comparable with some of the denser areas in Cyberpunk. There are lots of civilians everywhere. There's some really beautiful art design. Like, the team did a great job on that. It's a really good experience overall. It's just those frame rate drops that irritate me a little bit, but overall it's quite a good experience.
Doesn't VRR save the day?
Yes, VRR on a compatible display mostly improves it. There's a little bit of an issue. I think it might be related to CPU performance a little bit on the consoles, but it is substantially better with VRR.
Okay, interesting. Let's talk about PC, Alex, because here's the thing, right? I mean, in the Microsoft leak. Direct special, it wasn't weekly. We talked about basically next generation consoles and the kind of reticence I guess we had about what was on offer there was basically that it's not as feature rich as what's happening in the PC space like 5 years earlier, i.e. now. And DLSS 3.5 does appear to be the next evolution of visuals, and it's phenomenal, right?
Yeah, it's very, very good. So obviously my video is going to, and it's going to be out by this time this comes out, so I can just talk about it a bit. But there's going to be obviously it's going to be a lot of positives there, because I actually think on like an 80% level, this is just my personal opinion. I'm not saying 80% of all my recordings look better or something like that. But like personally, I would say it's like 80% there of being like a vastly better image. And then there's some issues that come out that actually remind me a little bit of DLSS 2.0's early versions. Issues that it had. So, for example, I see in a couple of areas, like we saw with earlier versions of DLSS, a bit of posterization or you might call it over sharpening on certain edges that occur, and that showed it off in my video. And I also see on some areas, depending upon the size of the object and the amount of ambient lighting, so I think like small people like in the distance, cars in the distance, and also like small objects like bits of trash rolling on the ground or trash fluttering through the air, they actually have like some intense ghosting behind them at times. Sometimes it's not always though, like in direct sunlight it won't occur, but it will happen in like indirect lighting situations, and I point that all out in my video. And they remind me a lot of the issues that DLSS 2.0 base had that were cleaned up kind of over a number of year period, where we now look at DLSS, like the latest versions of DLSS where like these things are just not an issue anymore. So it's really, really interesting to see how it'll evolve over time. And I think it is a bit of a DLSS 2.0 moment as a result of that. Like, if you really do put them side by side, in like most of the cases, it's a lot better. And the thing is, you're getting a game that's also running better while looking better most of the time. That's a rare deal. That's a really rare deal. I think that's the one thing, like a lot of people are just going to be like looking at like the areas where it fails, but they're not like realizing, wait, it's actually running better while looking better most of the time, which is kind of like what DLSS is all about. So, it's like, it is obviously always a trade-off, because you're not doing native rendering and you're relying on, something that needs iteration time, because it's an ML model that is its first iteration of it that we're seeing in a game. So I'm super excited for the future there because I think it's going to have a similar evolution period to the original DLSS. Regarding what Oliver said about the game, I think now after trying it on the Ryzen 5 3600 again, I did measure that it was a little bit heavier on the CPU doing our little cool benchmark run there. And I think that is interesting that we have such a clear, I think it is one of those clearly CPU limited titles on console. We don't have a lot of really good examples of it always because it's hard to get a sense of those kind of things. But I think with the fact that they use dynamic resolution on consoles, and it's going to be scaling, whether based upon Tom's, for example, original preview footage, he noticed the scaling pretty intensely there.
Yeah.
In the moments when it was GPU limited. But here, definitely when I was on that Ryzen 5 3600, I'll show in the footage in the video, you can definitely see it's going up and down like a roller coaster depending upon where you are in the town. So that's pretty cool to see, and I think it's going to lead to fun stuff behind the scenes when Rich ever finds the time to use his Frankenstein's monster of a PC there to get some really cool benches of Cyberpunk and other games that we have now the settings for.
Yeah, absolutely. That is really interesting, right? I think the other thing, of course, is the concept of actually being able to use those developer streaming saves to actually use the cross-save thing to bring those over to the consoles to see if they work.
That'd be cool.
I'm kind of intrigued to give that a go because that could be quite fun. I mean, the city one that we use is pretty much the only usable one, I think. There's another one which goes into the city. The other thing, of course, is that doesn't quite enter the Tom's Diner area where CPU really seems to get absolutely hammered.
Yeah.
But yes, I'm actually really interested to find actual scenarios on consoles where we're definitely CPU limited, where beyond a shadow of a doubt it's the CPU that's the bottleneck, and then to compare it to actually running the PC code on the Xbox CPU via the 4800S desktop kit. That's all just really, really sort of kind of just weird testing I'd like to do for some reason. I've actually got a supporter question for you here, Alex.
Nice.
It's from Michael Pern. Hi crew, recently I played Cyberpunk 2077 version 2.0, hoping to see if DLSS 3.5 ray reconstruction would allow for better ray-traced effects, e.g. reflection quality, without requiring the full path tracing option enabled. Sadly, this is not the case in the Cyberpunk options menu. I thought ray reconstruction could be brought to the table for all RTX features without full path tracing. Otherwise, this feature on RTX 2 and 3 cards seems pointless due to extremely heavy requirement of path tracing. I think that he's got a point there, right? Because surely in your roundtable, they're actually saying ray reconstruction could be really good on just standard RT effects, but it wasn't deployed in Cyberpunk.
Yeah, I think this is actually just a timing issue, something that Jakob also pointed out, because when you have a set release date, and for this game, they want to position it in between something like Starfield, they want to position it between the October Madness. There's also things where ray reconstruction doesn't support DLAA right now. So if you did want to play the game with, for example, at 1080p or 1440p DLAA with a RTX 4000 series card, which I think is a viable way to play the game, you can't even use ray reconstruction there right now. I think it's just kind of still not fully done in terms of how they want it perfectly integrated at the end of the day. It doesn't support DLAA. It doesn't support the other RT modes. I think that's just a little bit of engineering and QA time that they didn't have before the game launch. And as far as I know, DLAA is planned support, as well as there's planned support to enable it with any of the ray tracing options. Now, the one thing I wouldn't necessarily say is right now with path tracing, if you turn on RT Overdrive, it will run better with ray reconstruction on, as my video will show. I don't necessarily think that might be the case with if you turn it on, if you just have reflections on, or just have RT lighting on, or just RT shadows on, because I imagine those individual denoisers for those things are perhaps a bit simpler and they're not as heavy. Brian pointed out a 2 millisecond cost for the ray tracing at 4K on an RTX 4090. So if you go down the stack, it's then it goes up to 4 milliseconds on something like a 3080, 3090. And then it goes, if you're running a 2070 or something like that, it goes up to like 8 milliseconds if you think about it.
You wouldn't be doing 4K.
If you wouldn't be doing 4K
2070.
there, but if you're doing like 1440p, maybe it's like something like 5 to 6 milliseconds just for the denoising for ray reconstruction or something like that. That is definitely a difference. So yeah, that's something to keep in mind whenever they up, because this is obviously they're still not done with the game. They even hinted in the interview, they're like, oh, maybe we'll try and add some more ray tracing goodness. Jakob mentioned at one moment. So it's still not done. Cyberpunk is just never done. Dauerbaustelle, I would say in German.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I don't really know if we've got too much more to add because we've got so much content either on the channel now or in the pipeline. So, I guess we'll leave it there for now and just wait and see how our final analysis all shapes up.